You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me again this week on episode number 461 of our little podcast, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I am Mighty Blue, and we've got another interesting show for you this week. We've got a listener to the show who is a board member of the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club and a trail ambassador. He completed a 5-year section hike in 2022 and is here to share his story with us. His name is John Turner, known on the trail as Raven, and we have a wide-ranging chat, not only about his hike, but his work with GATC and his book, which has an extremely interesting title. We'll hear from John in a moment. My chat with John's quite long, so I was pleased when I saw that this week's chapter from Emily Leonard's Happy Hiking was only about 5 pages long. But it is about one of the most iconic spots on the trail, Maccabee Knob. We'll hear of that after John. So let's get on and introduce you all to John Turner, or Raven. So we've got a member of the board of directors and a trail ambassador for Georgia Appalachian Trail Club as our guest today. This is John Turner, or Raven. Hey, John, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hello, Steve. Thank you.
And before we get into it, what exactly does a trail ambassador do for these ATC clubs?
Yes, the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club, of course, we maintain the trail in Georgia, but we also have a program called Trail Ambassadors. And most hikers are familiar with ridge runners. We have ridge runners in Georgia and the Smokies and other places. Our trail ambassadors fill in for the ridge runners. And we also staff a base camp at Amicalola Falls State Park, where the hikers arrive and they check in, and we give them a brief orientation and send them on their way.
So how often are you there? Because I remember meeting ridge runners, especially in the Smokies. I particularly remember, they're kind of always there picking up the trash at the shelters. Is that the kind of thing you do as well?
We do that. We do more than that. Most hikers start in Georgia. That's well known.
Sure.
And most of them start at Amicalola Falls State Park. Mm. And so we get many, many hikers arriving there. Many of them are very well prepared. They know what they're doing. They've got good equipment, and they're ready to go. And they don't need any help from us at all.
Right.
But some do. And so we have...
Some need a heck of a lot, I should think.
That is correct. That is correct. We see all kinds of folks at Amicalola, and we try to help them if they need it. We're not going to hold their hand. We're not going to explain what's about to happen. We want them to discover the trail for themselves.
Of course.
But some just need assistance. And sometimes they even need to be rescued. And so we provide that service as well.
So have you met people at Amicalola turning up completely unprepared but thinking they're going to do a thru hike?
Yes, that's happened. It happens every season.
So tell me, how badly prepared are they?
Well, I met a young fellow last spring. I think it was in March, right in the middle of the bubble, and he showed up. And he was from New York. He had not heard of the Appalachian Trail until 3 or 4 days prior to showing up. He got on a bus. He went, got some equipment. He got on a bus, got to Atlanta, somehow got him to Amicalola Falls State Park, and was ready to hit the trail. And it was pretty obvious from talking with him that he was physically unprepared, and equipment was, I think we weighed his pack, I think it was 65 or 70 pounds. And so he didn't have cold weather gear. He thought, well, Georgia's in the South, so it can't be all that bad. Well, it can't be.
Yeah, it certainly can. Yeah, I remember it well. I remember being freaking freezing from time to time.
Correct.
Now, like me, you are not in the first flush of youth. And also like me, you came to long distance hiking at a fairly advanced age, didn't you? You're 75 now. When did you start hiking as much as you do now?
I started hiking shortly after I retired in 2015 and did some day hikes. But my serious hiking really began. I was up on the Appalachian Trail near Long Creek Falls, which people may know who've hiked the trail. And I ran into a fellow who had a big backpack, and he was headed north. And I stopped and talked to him. And he was going to Katahdin. And I thought, Katahdin, wow. I didn't know about Katahdin.
Is that in Georgia?
It's not in Georgia. It's a long way from Georgia.
Yeah.
So this intrigued me. I then subsequently ran into a trail crew, maintenance crew from the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club. And I stopped and talked to them. And I told my wife about this. And she said, you should look into this. You should have some people to hike with.
Huh.
And that's how I wound up hiking in Georgia. And I really started seriously hiking in 2017.
So you mentioned you did this when you retired. What actually were you doing when you were in your work life?
I was working for the state of Georgia, one of the Georgia agencies, the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. I was division director. It was a wonderful job, but it was very high stress, lots of hours put in. And when I retired, I needed both physical and mental rehabilitation. And I just started going to the Appalachian Trail for day hikes because I live not too far from Springer Mountain, really
Sure.
about an hour. Yeah.
It's funny, the trail more, and this comes up in every conversation you have with anybody who's hiked on trail. The trail gives you so much more when you need it. That was true trail magic. You bumped into somebody who told you about, going all the way to Katahdin, and it's probably the exact time that you most needed it, wasn't it?
That's correct. And I needed just some physical rehabilitation because when you sit in an office and go to meetings and then sit and goes to more meetings, that's what happened to me for a number of years.
Sure.
And a treadmill, I found out, is not the same as hiking the Appalachian Trail. It just isn't.
Yeah. I know people think they can do it just by turning up. You have to get into hiking shape, but the only way I think you can actually get into hiking shape is to hike, isn't it? And get those miles on your legs. And so with a relatively short hiking experience, you got involved in the GATC. What actually drew you into helping the Appalachian Trail Club in Georgia?
First, it was the hikes. The club sponsors hikes, as many other trail clubs do.
Yeah.
And so I joined those hikes and learned from very experienced hikers, members of our club, about hiking. And that's how I hiked all of Georgia in day hikes. Right. But the club has a number of other activities. And I became drawn to that, particularly trail maintenance. And I helped out on some trail maintenance days. We do that year round in Georgia.
Yeah.
Every third Saturday, we've got a cruise out on the trail doing that. I did a few of those and enjoyed it and thought, well, this is a great way to meet people and get out and give back to the trail. And lo and behold, after a short time, I was assigned a section of the trail to maintain. So
What have you got?
I've got a section, and people will understand where it is if they've hiked Georgia because it is Girard Gap, and Girard Gap is where the mandatory bear canister rule starts on March 1st. And from there to Horsebone Gap is my section that I maintain.
Do you do it with other people, or is that it's your responsibility, but do you go out with a crew?
It's my responsibility, so I'm often up there by myself.
Right.
And sometimes I go with other crews, yeah.
And do you model yourselves on the main ATC, or does each club have its own specific mandate, as far as you know?
I don't think we're modeled on anyone. Georgia's pretty unique for the very simple fact that we have every spring, late winter and early spring, we get about 4,000 hikers who show up in Georgia. Yeah. Now, they're not all through hikers, but many people are section hikers, as I was, and they all show up in Georgia. Now, they may not stay in Georgia very long. Yeah. They may go home, as you know, many of them do, but they start in Georgia. And so that puts a tremendous stress on the trail and the trail infrastructure in Georgia.
I'm sure.
we have about, I think, 100, maybe 200 trail maintainers in our club.
Wow.
And we maintain 78 miles of the AT, plus all the Blue Blaze trails and all the shelters and all the privies and bridges and so forth. So it's a very big job. And we have been doing this for a long time, since 1930.
And you as a hiker, you say you got into longer distance hiking after you retired. Had you hiked much as a kid, or was this something completely new to your life and you feel you needed this after this stressful job?
I had hiked very little. I had a couple of backpack trips with friends many years before this, and they didn't go well. And so when I told my wife I was going to...
it's such a humbling experience, don't
you
think so?
It's so much so. And when I told my wife I was going to backpack, she said, "Oh my goodness, here we go again."
Oh dear. And you mentioned earlier the stress of your job. Have you ever considered what it actually is that the trail does to our psyche? Because many of us feel at our best out there, often in fairly inhospitable conditions we wouldn't normally accept in life. But there's something about being on a trail that brings something out in us that makes it a very comfortable place to be, isn't it?
That is absolutely true, and I've thought about that a lot. One of the characteristics of the Appalachian Trail that I think is fairly unique, maybe not completely, but is the combination of solitude and camaraderie.
Yeah.
You have hours and hours of solitude where you're by yourself. And even if you're hiking with friends, you know, the adage, hike your own hike, people wind up hiking separately. Maybe they meet up at the end of the day.
Sure.
Those hours of solitude are priceless. And if you're fortunate and you can put aside all of the turmoil in your life, the things that are going on in your life, and just concentrate on being out in the woods, out in nature, it's very, very therapeutic, particularly if you do it day after day after day. One day is one thing, but
there's
to do
something
it
about a route. There's something about a routine,
That's
isn't
exactly.
there? And I think that it's the comfort of a routine on a hiking trip that is probably the most comforting thing. You know what you do. You get up in the morning, you eat, you walk, you eat, you walk, you go to bed, and you eat and then go to bed.
That is exactly right. It removes a lot of the decision making that we have to make in our daily lives. You get up, you know what you're going to wear because you've been wearing it.
Yeah.
And you don't care.
There's very little choice. You don't have to wander into a wardrobe at all, do you?
That's right. And you don't really care what it looks like.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so you get up, you eat something. What is your decision for the day? Well, it might be, do I want to stop at this particular shelter, or how am I feeling? Do I want to keep going? Am I tired? Do I want to stop and rest? Those are really the decisions you make.
Yeah. One of the things I've said more actually, I said it in earlier days when I got back from my second through hike in 2019, was that, you know, life in general, we have way too many choices and options. It's so much simpler when there are so few options, and you don't have to think too much about what you want to do. And you don't really get that distracted, do you? Because those options are so limited.
That's correct. That's correct. And then the other aspect of this is the people you meet. The Appalachian Trail is, in a sense, a social trail, a people trail, because there's so many people on it. Now, they may be through hikers, and then if that's the case, you have this almost immediate bond with people that you meet, or at least you have a familiarity because you're doing the same thing.
That's right.
Even if it's a southbounder. And so meeting another hiker for me on the trail was always a great experience. Then at night, at the shelters or camping, I had wonderful conversations with people that I had never met, never saw again. Some of them I did. But the camaraderie among hikers is something that's hard to explain if you haven't done it. It's a very warm and embracing and encouraging aspect of the Appalachian Trail.
In no other walk of life have I ever found that encouragement so strong. It's almost like, they want your success almost as much as you want your success, and almost as much as they want their own success. They want everybody around them to do this thing well, and because there's no winners in this, it doesn't matter when you get there. It's just a case of being out there and enjoying that space with somebody else. And
that's absolutely correct. And I had that experience over and over and over.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
And did the idea of section hiking the whole trail start marinating once you met the through hiker, or was that something? Because you said you mentioned it to your wife. Was that something that you started thinking, I can do this?
Well, at first, when I was still in Georgia, completing the Appalachian Trail all the way to Katahdin was not in my mind at all. It just seemed like too much.
It is
too much. It is. Yeah. But I had just retired, and I still had some responsibilities. So a through hike was out of the question. That was not going to happen. Right. And I wasn't really that interested in a section hike. But a funny thing happened. I completed Georgia. I got to Bly Gap, which is where the North Carolina line is, the famous twisted tree there.
Oh, yeah.
And you're looking up at North Carolina, and that's Courthouse Bald. That's the next mountain. And beyond that is Standing Indian. And you're at 5,000 feet. And I was looking at the trail profile, and I thought, I'd like to see what's up there. Just curiosity, really, more than anything else. And so I began to hike in the Nantahala and loved it. The Nantahala are beautiful.
Yeah.
And where the idea of completing the whole thing clicked in my head, I'm not quite sure. It was a gradual process.
Sure. And you mentioned your wife was supportive of you doing this. Did she kind of think, well, you won't really do it, this is just a midlife crisis, you're thinking about it? Or did she actively encourage you to do it and see that it was feeding your soul somehow?
Yes. Once it became clear to me that this was something I wanted to do, I needed to do, I had a fierce desire to complete the entire trail. Once she saw that and appreciated that, she was very supportive of it. Until then, it was just, what are you doing? Are you sure about this? And a little bit of anxiety about me being out there by myself at times. But at somewhere, I guess it was somewhere in Virginia, the idea was, I can do this, or maybe I can do this. I've got a decent chance to do it, and I have to try. I just have to. And it's been my thought from talking to hikers and from my own personal experience that whether it's a through hike or a section hike, the necessary ingredient to complete it is just a fierce desire to get it done.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. I've seen people who are wondering why they're out there every single day. I wondered why I was out there a few times, but really, you've got almost imposter syndrome, haven't you? That you think you can't necessarily do this. But if my desire to keep going every day trumped anything else around me, it was what I wanted. I remember the day before I started my first hike, I read something that said, it's got to be the thing you want to do more than anything else this summer. And it really was. And it was something I was very passionate about, wanted to do. And you mentioned that you started it in day hikes in the beginning, but of course that's not tenable eventually. When did you first start overnighting?
The Nantahala Outdoor Center in the Nantahala Gorge is as far as I got as far as day hiking with hiking with other people. Past that, it becomes pretty difficult to do that as a day hike, at least from where I live in Blue Ridge, Georgia. And so I had to commit to doing backpacking from Nantahala forward. And I did. I did do some slack packing occasionally in various other sections of the trail. But for the entire rest of the Appalachian Trail, I was a backpacker. I was a section backpacker.
Were you hiking by yourself most of the time, or did you have friends who went with you?
I did both. Both. In Georgia, I was with friends, and in most of Nantahala, I was with friends. And we had a small group of us, Georgia Appalachian Trail Club members, and they were much more involved and knew much more about hiking and backpacking than I did. I learned from them. They did the planning for our trips and so on and so forth. But the funny thing was that one by one, they sort of fell out. And there I was by myself one day. And I'll never forget it. It was my first solo. I started from the trailhead before you get to Grayson Highlands.
All right.
And off I went. And it was, I felt
Grayson
really...
Highlands feels quite remote, doesn't it? It feels, when you're out there, it feels very remote to me.
When I was out there, I didn't see it. I saw nothing but fog.
Oh, no.
I didn't see ponies. I didn't see anything. All I saw was sleet and fog. Once again, starting from zero in some sense as a backpacker, but I felt pretty confident that I could manage. And I had a rugged day. I got up there and the weather descended on me and made a very difficult day out of it.
So talk us then through that first night when you were camping entirely by yourself, because that's something of a rite of passage, isn't it, really?
It is. It is. I was so relieved to get to the shelter down below Grayson Highlands. I had planned to stop at a place called, I think they call the Styles. There's a corral. There was a bathroom. But I got there and it was underwater. So that was out of the question. Plus the wind was screaming and sleet was beginning to accumulate on the ground. So I kept going and I got down to the shelter, the next shelter, and there were a couple of people there. And I remember being so grateful to finally reach this shelter that I was able to get in the shelter, get dry, get into some dry clothes, and do the things you're supposed to do.
Sure.
And try to go to sleep. And it was a relief to be at that shelter.
Was there ever a time, because I know for me it was 406 miles into my first hike, when you had to spend a night away from a shelter and you were in a tent by yourself alone in the woods, or have you never given yourself that opportunity? Oh, right. Okay.
That happened. I can't count how many times, I don't think.
Right.
Very often it happened to me. And I'll give you one example. North of Pearisburg, the trail gets up on a ridge in Virginia.
Is it Peters Mountain? Up Peters Mountain, I think it is.
I believe it might be. Yeah. But you're up on ridges for quite a ways.
Yeah.
And that was my first day of a section hike. I was by myself north of Pearisburg. And I thought I had plenty of water. But I got up to the ridge, got up to the first shelter where there was a water source. It was dry.
Mm.
I thought, okay, well. So I kept going, and I met two hikers coming my way. And I told them where I was planning to camp that night. She said, well, there's no water there. And this lady said, we were just there, and there are 3 bears there. And they wouldn't leave us. So we packed up and left.
Wow.
So that ruled that out. So as a result, I had to go past that location. That's where I had planned to camp. And darkness caught me. And I'm up on the trail. And I thought, well, it's time to stop. And I had not reached the next shelter. So I camped in a thicket of rhododendron. And I was fine. It was okay.
It's kind of exciting to get it out of the way.
It wasn't
I realize when you wake up in the morning, you didn't die in the night.
No, it wasn't a problem at all. Yeah. I felt foolish for not having carried enough water, but I didn't understand that those water sources up on the ridges in Virginia would be so dry.
Yeah, I'm sure. And of course, day hiking and long distance backpacking are entirely different. So how did your gear transition in those early days? Because, you said you knew nothing about it when you first started, so you probably bought stuff you didn't work out so well. But then, as time goes on, your gear comes together, doesn't it?
It does. My first backpacking, a friend of mine called me up and said, I'm going to the Smokies to hike the entire Smoky Mountains, AT and Smokies. Do you want to come with me? I said, sure, I'd love to do that. And the only problem was I'm leaving in a couple of days. So I said, well, I don't have the right equipment. He said, just bring what you got. You'll be fine. Well, I was not fine. I was hiking with a little 30-liter day pack.
By the way, it's a life lesson. When someone says to you, bring what you got, you'll be fine. It's not going to work ever.
That is correct. Never do that. And so I had a pretty rugged experience in the Smokies. That's not the place to start to learn about backpacking. It really is not.
Yeah.
I had the wrong shoes, the wrong backpack, the wrong sleep gear. That was the worst part because I couldn't sleep in the shelters.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I just loved the experience. And I thought, I've got to learn how to do this correctly.
Right.
And that sent me into a search for the proper gear. Talking to other hikers helped a lot. And I did become better prepared. I slowly acquired the right gear. I went through 2 separate backpacks on my entire trek, and finally wound up with a lightweight. When I learned the lesson that weight plus distance equals pain.
Yeah, and less weight makes it easier, definitely.
And so less weight is always better.
Yeah.
There's a limit to that. You have, I'm at my age, I had to have some creature comforts.
Darn right. I always carry a chair with me now. I actually have a chair, one of those little Helinox chairs, which I love. It's the most valuable piece of equipment I own, I tell you. And you referred earlier to the type of work you've been doing, which sounded pretty regimented in many ways. Did you take some of the discipline you'd needed over the years into your new hobby?
Absolutely, yes. I had to be very, very organized and disciplined in my job, and down to the point of planning meticulously what my day would be. As a hiker, I quickly learned that a form of discipline was very necessary to hike well. You can hike in a disorganized way, but it's not as enjoyable. And I learned and I began to appreciate that it's necessary to have your act together when you get out there in terms of your gear. So pretty quickly, I got to the point where I could pack up my backpack in 5 minutes. Everything had a place. Everything went in the proper place. And I learned a lesson about this in North Carolina. I was hiking along, having a wonderful day, and I brushed against something and cut my hand. And it wasn't bad. I knew that I was fine, but it was bleeding, and so I knew I had to take care of it. And I got to a shelter and took my backpack off. Guess where my first aid kit was? At the bottom of my backpack. Big mistake. So everything comes out of the backpack,
It's frustrating, isn't it? You're pulling it out, you're cursing, you're pulling it out, you think, why didn't I pack it here?
And here, blood. And so I've learned those kinds of things, to have the necessary equipment at hand, and then everything else packed away. And talking to other backpackers, other hikers, was really where I learned all this. But I, from my experience in my job, I knew the importance of discipline. Yes.
Sure. And I know you weren't hiking this entirely sequentially, and because I know your original intention was finish up at Katahdin, but that didn't work out anyway. But I know it was a very special day for you, and it is for most of us, although I've often heard from people that, they feel a bit flat once they do summit Katahdin. But it wasn't your final day. So talk us through that day, because it must have still been incredibly special.
It was an amazing day. First of all, it almost did not happen. I was having pretty serious trouble with arthritis in my back in the 100-mile wilderness. And that's not a great place to be, have a fragile back. But that was what I was dealing with. No, that's what I was dealing with. When I got to the kiosk at the entrance to Baxter State Park, where I had a reservation for the next night, the weather forecast said 100% chance of severe thunderstorms for the day that I planned to summit.
Nice.
And I thought, that's going to be a problem. But things worked out. And even though I had thought I was not going to be able to go up, thanks to a ranger who assisted me and so forth, and just some lucky breaks, the weather was better the next day. And at 4 a.m., I started up. And when I first saw that sign, when I was on the tableland, my heart started racing. Yeah, I got emotional. And of course, this was not going to be the completion of my trek. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And the clouds came in and obscured the sign for a while. And then when I was within 20 feet or so, the clouds kind of parted and I saw that sign, and it was overwhelming. The emotion was overwhelming. And here comes this old man staggering up there. There were 8 or so hikers clustered around the sign, and they all turned and saw me and started clapping. And I thought, oh my goodness, that bat off. But yes, it was a very emotional, cathartic experience for me. There were people there who were giddy with laughter. There were a young lady who was crying and saying, I don't know what to do now. Where do I go?
Yeah,
you know. And the thing, Steve, about Katahdin that's so fantastic is that emotion it brings out. Whether I don't care how far you've gone, Katahdin is a serious climb.
So it sure is. Yeah.
But as the ranger down at Katahdin Stream Campground reminded me, you get up the thing, that's great. You got to get down it.
Yeah, that's
and
worse.
Coming down is tough.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't stay there very long. I had to get down and to meet my shuttle.
You did mention when we spoke the other day that as a section hiker, you don't tend to form a tramily, but you had some interesting points to make about that. So talk to us about tramilies and people you hike with. So.
Yes. As a section hiker, day one starts over and over and over and over.
Yes.
And so if you do meet wonderful people, that you will, eventually they're going to keep going and you're going to go home. And then you come back to the trail and you start that process all over again. But I met wonderful folks on the trail. And in New York, I got to meet a trio of hikers, one of whom was a retired Army Ranger. And just a wonderful guy, real serious guy, but he was a great hiker. And whatever reason, he was very interested in me and what I do and trail maintenance and so on and so forth. So we had a lot of good common things to talk about. And of course, I was really interested in his experience as a ranger, Army Ranger. Well, in New York, they went on and I went home. In fact, I had to go home because I got an infected fingernail and had to have a little mini surgery in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. So I had to go home. But I came back, and as I was hiking up Katahdin and reached the tableland and was struggling for that last, mile or whatever it is.
Yeah, feels much longer.
Yes, I hear this voice behind me. And this young man says, "Hey, is that you?" And I turn around and it's him. It's the Army Ranger that I had, because I had jumped up in front of him. So he had caught up to Katahdin. And we summited together. He was there on the summit with me. And that's just made it so much more incredible experience, because for him, his hike was finished. And I was actually glad that my hike wasn't finished, to tell you the truth.
I bet you were. Yeah.
I thought, well, I've got more experiences to come.
But eventually you did finish. So you completed the section between 2017 and 2022, I think it was.
Yes.
Do you feel that you've changed as a result of the hike, or is this just a natural development of us older guys as we get older?
No, I've asked that question of other hikers. Has the experience changed you? And invariably the answer is yes, even if they don't want to admit it. And some people sort of hedge about, I don't know. Yes, it did. I particularly have met a lot of...
Sorry, I think your awareness on that question becomes more apparent as the months roll past and you think more about it, and it tends to form a narrative in your own head that you didn't realize when you first finished it. Well, for me, that's the case anyway.
Yes. But absolutely it changed me. And I remember one young lady that I talked to in the 100-mile wilderness, I believe it was. And she said, I know I could do anything now. Yes. I can do this. I can do anything.
I love that.
And I think that's it's a confidence builder, but it's also a spiritual even if you're not a religious person or a spiritual person, it does have this dimension to it that is beyond the mundane, beyond the physical world. It does change you. It changed me because I didn't know that I could do this. And having done it now is given me a kind of a new perspective,
I'm sure,
on myself.
I'm sure. Now, you've written a book about your adventures with an intriguing title, Killing the Buddha on the Appalachian Trail, Walking On Through Self-Doubt and Aging. Tell us what killing the Buddha means. You've explained it to me when we spoke the other day, and I didn't understand it at the time, but then you told me. So tell us what it actually means.
Well, first I have to apologize to all Buddhists out there. I am not a Buddhist, but I've read and studied Buddhism for quite a long time, and it has sort of informed my life and been the background, I guess you'd say, of the Buddhist teaching. And as I was hiking and gaining more and more miles and more and more experience, I began to understand that what I was experiencing had some parallels with Buddhist teaching. And then I ran across an expression from a 9th century Zen Buddhist master. And it was, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Now, what this means, what he was trying to convey to his monks, was that if you find yourself acting like you're a big man, or you're holy, you're something important, you're a big shot, kill that. And the reverse, the obverse, applies. If you find that you're feeling that you're not worthy, your life is a mess, or you're making a mess of something, and you've got this self-doubt that's nagging you down and so forth, you have to kill that. Well, in my hiking, and I think many other hikers experience this, I had moments of doubt, moments when I thought, what in the world am I doing out here? This is crazy.
We all do.
This is crazy. What am I doing here? I cannot do this. And I ran into a hiker at one of the shelters in Virginia who told me something. He said, never quit on a bad day. You might have heard that. Never quit on a bad day. Yeah. So I had to kill that Buddha multiple times, over and over and over, in order to get past those moments when you just want to go home. You just think you cannot do this. It's too much. The mountain's too high. Your knees are, aching. Your feet are hurting, and you're tired of rotten food, crummy food, and or whatever it is. And for me, one of the moments that was one of my worst was in a place that no other hiker, I think, would consider to be a bad place. It was on Wolf Mountain. And I got up on Wolf Mountain, and there was nothing but mud, just mud. And I remember thinking, I can't, no more. I can't deal with this mud anymore. I just can't take it anymore. And of course I could, and mosquitoes and so forth and so on. So it's getting past that. That's what killing the Buddha is all about.
But normally, though, I think you killed the Buddha every night when you got into camp, because all those things that you'd endured through the day, you look back on them, you think, well, I got through it. I remember saying to someone,
yes.
turning behind me, he was struggling, and I said, look behind you. We've been over all those bloody mountains. You can get over this one as well. It's just another thing that's challenging you as you go along.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
I know that your trail name, Raven, is revealed, you told me at the end of the book.
Yes, it is.
Tell us about why you're Raven.
In my hiking, when I was in North Carolina, I was struggling with a number of things, but the worst problem I had in my early days of hiking was being able to sleep. I just couldn't sleep. And so when I got to Spivey Gap, which is south of Irwin, Tennessee,
sure,
I got to Spivey Gap after 3 nights without any sleep at all.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And I started up a mountain. The mountain does not even have a name. It's not a big mountain. But going up that mountain, I just didn't think I could get to it. And I was ready to quit. I was ready to throw my backpack off the mountain and go home. But I got to the top of that thing. And as I was walking on the ridge kind of would go out on a nose and then back into a cove and out on the nose and back in. And I'm feeling sorry for myself. And oh my goodness, my shoulders ache, my feet ache, all that stuff. And I hear a squawk up above me. And I looked up. The trees had not leafed out yet. And there was a raven up above me, flying the same direction I was going. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a raven. And I knew it was a raven. It wasn't a crow. The raven flew off, but it came back. And it went right over my head, very low, right treetops. And it did this over and over and over. I know it had to have done it 6 times. And somewhere in there, about 5 or 6 times that it came over my head, I realized I don't feel bad anymore. My feet weren't aching anymore. My shoulders weren't aching. And I was tromping along at about a 2.5 mile pace. And I thought, I can do this. I can overcome this. And it was such an emotional moment for me. I had to stop and get myself together because I was afraid someone would come along and see this grown man just, breaking down with joy. So I got to no business shelter. That's the next shelter.
Right.
And I was thinking, I have no business being up here in the first place. But got there and I told my friend about the raven. He said, well, you're a raven.
There you go. Perfect. Could have been crow. So fortunately you were raven. So raven's a far better name.
Crows are okay, but ravens are better.
Now, the blurb on your book reads, a personal journey that explores the relationship between the natural world and the inner pursuit of peace. It also covers the trail's history, hiker ethics and culture, as well as reflections on the variety and beauty of landscapes through hikers' encounter over the course of their journey. That's kind of encompasses a lot. What are you hoping readers take away from your book?
That's a good question. And what they will take away, I hope, is a couple of things. One is an understanding of what is involved, what the Appalachian Trail really is. It's a priceless treasure that we have. And it has so much variety to it, so much that is so worth saving. That's one of the things I hope that comes through is we must save, we must preserve and protect this priceless treasure we have called the Appalachian Trail.
Sure.
The other thing that I hope comes through is that you can fail and then keep failing. And if you keep going, if you just put one foot in front of another, you can succeed. You can reach a very difficult goal. And anyone who's done it will tell you, no matter how you've done it, from Georgia to Katahdin, that's quite an achievement. It's a
schlep. It's definitely a schlep.
It is. It is. And then finally, Steve, a few thoughts about nature. And, in our conventional sense of what nature is here in America, we think nature is outside. It's out that door. It's out that window. It's out the car window. Or it's in the picture frame hanging on our wall. That's nature.
Sure.
Well, when you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, no, you are nature. There's nothing but nature. And it gives you this broader sense of nature that really comes home the farther you go, because you get such an experience of different geographies and environments. You invariably encounter animals of various sorts, if you're lucky, and I was. And you cannot come back from an experience like that without having a deeper appreciation for nature and for how fragile nature can be, because you get the sense of the damage that invasive species have caused, how it's changing the Appalachian Trail. You get this sense of the threats of development that perhaps could impinge upon the viewscape of the Appalachian Trail, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I know you were a journalist in a previous life before your other stressful job. Well, I'm sure journalism is stressful in itself. And I'm sure you're very self-critical about your writing anyway, or it's important to you. Did the book turn out as you'd intended, or did some of it surprise even you?
Yes, it did surprise me. It was what I intended. As a former newspaper reporter, I just had the habit of taking notes. And so every single day, from Springer all the way to Katahdin, I have a little notebook. I've got quite a few of them now. And I would write notes about my experience.
Sure.
Every day that I was on the trail, I had notes. And I would come back and look at those notes. And over time, it occurred to me that there's a story here. There's something here. I needed to add something to it. And what I needed to add was my own personal experience. And for a journalist, writing in first person is not a comfortable thing to do. I had never done that before. I had always been the objective viewer,
Right.
rather than the subject.
But you were still a viewer in this book. You told me, it said that because several of the hikers you met helped drive the narrative or inform the narrative in some way.
That's
an important part of it. Exactly. Of course you could. And we all do, don't we?
Training. That's my old training as a newspaper reporter. But I had to dig down into my own life a little bit more than really was comfortable at times, and explain how the trail was bringing these things out from my life experience. And that's why in the book there's some passages that don't occur on the Appalachian Trail.
Sure. That's as most books shouldn't. It should incorporate something other than the trail, because you just bring your experience on the trail to them. That doesn't give the whole story, does it? So where can people get the book then?
Okay, so the book is published by the University of Georgia Press. It's available on Amazon. You can go to University of Georgia Press and order it there, or through Amazon, and I believe Barnes & Noble online. Right. And it's at one of the REI stores in Atlanta at Alpharetta. Nice. So it was published October 1st. It's just now getting out there.
Well, I'll put the links in the show notes of the book. It's been a really interesting conversation for me. You know, we only decided to do this yesterday, so I'm glad we went ahead and did it. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And thanks for everything you do for the trail as well.
Thank you, Steve. I enjoyed it very much.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy, okay?
Okay.
Cheers. Bye. As I said at the end, I found John to be an absolutely fascinating guy to talk with about the trail. He's not simply a hiker, he's also working for the betterment of the trail and for hikers. We should all be grateful for that. I'll put a link in the show notes to his book, as well as to his website and the website of the Georgia AT Club. After we stopped recording, John invited me to attend next year's AT kickoff, which I know is now under a new name, but I cannot for the life of me recall what it's now called. I said I'll come, so if you're setting out in early March, don't forget to come up to me and say hi before you go under the arch at Amicalola. Thanks, as always, to our donors. At the beginning of the new month, all my bills go out, so I'm particularly sensitive financially when they do. This week, I want to thank Kevin Eastman, Small World IFT, Michael Garsh, Ann Dobson, Mike DiCello, David Santi, Alan Troy, Jens Lipperheider, Brian Helton Jr., and Lisa Rana, all recurring donors who help ease the pain every month. Thanks to you all. Now, Emily has reached the iconic McAfee Knob, made even more special as she was able to see it first thing in the morning with Bruce. I'll see you all next week. Chapter 16, McAfee Knob. McAfee Knob, here we come. The most photographed spot on the Appalachian Trail was a modest 1.7 miles away and just under a 1,000-foot climb. After a wonderful night of rest, Bruce and I were up and ready to go early. Not surprising, but this day I was extra excited to hang my legs over the rocky outcropping and dangle them in space for the iconic photo. I didn't care how scared I was of heights. I was going to do it. Bruce and I left the shelter, walked a few hundred yards and came to a junction of the trail and a fire road. It was at that point we realised if we had stayed on the road and not backtracked the night before, we could have shaved over an hour off our hike. But who knew? We had done the best we could with the information we had. Taking risks is important for growth, but when in doubt, it's always better to be safe than sorry. We only lost an hour or so, but time spent with Bruce is always time well spent. Besides, I would have missed all those white blazes. Discovering what idiots we'd been, we laughed at last night's wrong turn. I giggled and stood next to the junction sign while Bruce took crazy photos of me with a staged look of bewilderment. We naturally have a laid-back outlook, but sometimes life beats us down. On the trail, we were able to reconnect with that inner free spirit we love so much about each other. It was nice to escape the real world and be out there having fun. So many couples give up on their marriage because life beats them into a place where they fall out of love. But love is a choice, not a feeling. It may start out as a feeling, but then it's a choice to stay in love. When life cornered us against the ropes, we would use those ropes to tie ourselves closer together. We made a commitment for better or worse. Being out on the trail helped us to grow even deeper in love than we already were by allowing us to reconnect. Our motto has always been, the couple that plays together stays together. We arrived at the famous Maccabee Knob in no time. I don't remember the climb being all that difficult, but I was impressed with a runner we saw who passed us on the way up. He was out for a morning jog. My idea of a morning jog was not a 1,000-foot ascent under 2 miles. But then again, most ideas of a hike probably doesn't involve a 30-pound pack and 2,200 miles. It's all relative. And there it was, Maccabee Knob. It was just as impressive as the photos I'd seen in books and Facebook posts. Green mountains stretched in all directions like elongated spines of sleeping lizards. The valleys resembled indentations of their vertebrae. The jogger who had passed us was at centre stage on the knob. Bruce and I stood in the wings to let him enjoy his time. It was early in the morning and no other hikers were around, so we had time before it was our turn. After several minutes, the jogger rose and began his exit. I struck up a conversation with him before he escaped. We learned he had just joined the National Guard. He was using his run as training before boot camp. We asked if he had time to snap our picture before he headed back down the mountain. Maybe Bruce and I met the next Audie Murphy. Bruce and I enjoyed our brief time together on the natural landmark. It was a thrill to share it together. But 18 miles were on the pod plan of the day, so we said our goodbyes. He headed south and I headed north. It would be a short separation. Bruce would collect me again once Walking Man, GQ and I arrived in Daleville, Virginia. One mountain with some cliff walking was our only challenge that day. It was followed by several miles of very little elevation gain or loss, then a quick drop into town and we could eat, shower and rest. Bruce and I knew in advance where we would rendezvous. On a road trip home from Florida the previous summer, we detoured into Daleville. It was exciting to be on the trail and experience the unknown. But after a stretch of the unfamiliar, there was something very comforting about the familiar. When I stepped out of the woods, it was reassuring to know where I was. It wasn't just another town. For over a year, Bruce and I had this marked as one of our places to stop. The main reason was the Cracker Barrel restaurant, where I wanted to feast. Walking Man, GQ, Bruce and I met at the local outfitter. More than 700 miles had taken a toll on our gear. We needed various items to replace worn-out ones. While we were taking advantage of being inside, the clouds let go and dumped Niagara on the little town. Timing is everything. Sometimes it's arriving at a trailhead just before trail angels are packing up. Sometimes it's meeting a day hiker who's going to the town you need to ride by. And sometimes it's getting to a shelter before Mother Nature shows you who is boss. That day, timing was on our side as well. Bruce braved the elements to get the car, then he shuttled us across the parking lot to our eatery of choice. Not Cracker Barrel, though. We chose a local place known for its barbecue called the Three Little Pigs. Timing was on our side once again. We were the last party to have its order cooked before the establishment lost power. Was it the timing fairy that was looking out for us? Was it coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. I believe good goes round, and we had done a lot of good for others on the trail so far, not because we were hoping for something in return, but because it was the right thing to do. You reap what you sow, and it was our time to be on the receiving end of good. While we waited out the storm, devouring our meals, we concurred that we would not sleep in the soggy, storm-drowned park. GQ and Walking Man booked a room at the Howard Johnson's, while hubby and I headed to a Sheraton hotel in nearby Roanoke, Virginia. It was heaven. When asked if he wanted 1 king bed or 2 queens, I quickly interjected 2 queens. Not because I didn't want to be snugly with hubby. My motives were selfish, but for a good reason. 2 beds meant more pillows. The Sheraton equips each bed with 4 pillows. Even with my poor math skills, I knew 2 times 4 is 8. That's 8 more clouds of comfort than when sleeping on the trail. Bedtime rolled around and I, being a pillow glutton, took 7 of the luxurious feather puffs, leaving my non-complaining trail angel with one solitary piece of comfort. The lucky 7 pillows lulled me swiftly to sleep that night, but did not keep me coddled for long. At exactly 2:44 a.m, I woke up famished. Most Americans never truly experience hunger, at least not in the third world sense of it. We only think we know what it is to be empty in the gut when we have to fast for 24 hours for a colonoscopy. That night I had feelings of hunger that were maddening. I tossed and turned and could not go back to sleep. I got up as quietly as I could in the hotel room and made myself a PB&J, opened a bag of chips, tried doing that quietly, and a can of soda. Then I proceeded to have a full meal just before 3 a.m. I was wired from the sugar rush, so I started repacking my gear for the next day. By 6 a.m, Bruce joined me and we went to breakfast, meal number 2, all before most people think about waking. So many weird changes were happening to me on the trail. I was becoming a sentimental, blabbering fool. I was doing things I didn't know I had the strength to do, and my body was changing as well as my mind. It was like I was being peeled apart, layer by layer. Midnight hunger attacks became common, but most of the time I couldn't do anything about it because my food was hung in a tree, hopefully safe from critters. Fortunately, that night I could get up and eat. Or, unfortunately, I could get up and eat, which then kept me awake. Now it was going to be a long day on the trail. I was so hoping for a 0, but I was committed to doing whatever the guys wanted to do. The least it could be was a Nero day. We all wanted to do laundry in the neighbouring town. It would be an afternoon start at the earliest. Daleville has a sister town, Troutville, that lies next door, separated by 1.5 miles of the easiest stretch of trail. Since we all needed to do laundry and we hadn't taken a 0 in several days, we decided we deserved it. Yay! I was so relieved. Well, it was almost a 0. I gave Bruce my gear and so did the guys. It was the first and only time I had seen GQ and Walking Man slackpack. We started where we had ended the day before, crossed the road and disappeared into the woods. I was freed from the weight of my pack and ran the short distance to Troutville, arriving in under 15 minutes. I didn't even break a sweat. It was such a great feeling to be in that kind of shape. The guys were not far behind. The 4 of us were back together once again, and we drove the half mile to the town park and pitched our tents. I fell in love with Troutville. I'm not sure why. There wasn't much to it. It was a small, welcoming town, allowing hikers to camp in the park for free. There was also free laundry for hikers at the fire station across the street. While Bruce did my laundry, GQ, Walking Man and I went our separate ways, napping in the park. It wasn't long until our stomachs brought us back together, and off to supper we went, this time at Cracker Barrel. With another full tummy packed with carbs and protein, we made our way back to our home for the night. A gentleman was waiting for me at the entrance to the park. He asked if I was the owner of the tent close to the playground. I confirmed ownership and explained why I put it there. It was close to the bathroom. He informed me I needed to move it because the parents in the town get nervous when the hikers have their tents too close to where the kids play. I laughed politely and said I understood. Despite suspecting me of being a threat to society, Troutville remained one of my favourite places so far. But if there is ever a next time, I will remember to stay on my side of the tracks.